Good evening. I'm Rob Garris. I'm the Associate Dean for External Relations here at SIPA, and I'd like to welcome you to the school. It's an honor for us to host former Peruvian President Alejandro Toledo this evening, and I would like to thank the Institute for Latin American Studies, Professor Al Fishlow, and Carlos Terrones for their efforts in organizing this event. I think the turnout for this lecture is a reflection of the importance of our speaker and a demonstration of our students' strong interest in Latin American policy issues. The strength of Latin American studies here at SIPA can be attributed in no small part to the intellectual leadership and considerable energy of the director of the Institute of Latin American Studies, Professor Al Fishlow. Professor Fishlow is one of the world's leading experts on Brazil and on development in Latin America. In addition to being one of the leading scholars in the field, Professor Fishlow has also played key roles in policymaking, including his work as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Inter-American Affairs for the United States. He was awarded the National Order of the Southern Cross by the government of Brazil and is the former Dean of International Studies at the University of California in Berkeley. Please join me in thanking Professor Fishlow for his leadership and welcoming him to the podium.
Thank you for that. I didn't think I needed to be introduced to so many of my friends who are here this evening for a very important event. And it's a delight that we have been able to obtain Professor Toledo here in order to speak to us about the problems of democracy and inequality within the region. I should like to say a few things about President Toledo. One of the things I will say, which is not included in the list of things I was supposed to say, is that he was editor of this book, which came out from a son a long time ago, and speaks about Peru and Latin America and how to finance growth. And the thing about it that I am very proud of is not only the nice statement that he provided to me inside the book, but also the fact that he put my name first at the top. So I feel that that was a special privilege. I have a long list of things that I am supposed to say about President Toledo. I will say them and a few other things as well. He is currently president of the Center for Democracy and Development and Distinguished Fellow in Residence at the Center for Advanced Studies and Behavioral Science at Stanford. Yesterday, he received the Presidential Medal from the New York Forum for Democracy, in which 3 institutions were involved: the America Society, the Foreign Policy Association, and the National Endowment for Democracy. As you all know, President Toledo was a leader of the forces that enabled democracy to return to Peru. And he deserves an immense amount of credit for that. This is not in what I was supposed to say. But over the time when he contested the presidency against then-President Fujimori, when he came out of academia and a professorship at ASAN, he was virtually alone in the effort. And it is only as a result of his persistence and his eventual and continuing efforts to arouse popular reaction within Peru that he was able to become president and to enable an election subsequently, in his succession, that was an election without difficulty, without exception, despite the extent to which it was a close election. It was an important event. Dr. Toledo, I now follow my script again that I was handed, is now, as I had mentioned, at the center at Stanford. While at Stanford, he has been a co-leader with Presidents Jimmy Carter and former President Barletta of Panama in the presidential election mission to Nicaragua in November of 2006. And most importantly, and I think the thing that makes his presence here of great interest to us all is the creation of the Center for Democracy and Development, of which he is the founder and president. And what it does, and he will tell us more about it, is to focus upon the interrelationship between poverty and inequality and the future of democratic governability within Latin America. So it is with enormous pleasure that I present to you today President Alejandro Toledo.
You're very kind, very generous. First of all, let me tell you that it's an enormous privilege to come to Columbia University, particularly to participate in an event that is sponsored by the School of International and Public Affairs and the Institute of Latin American Studies. It has a particular tone when it is organized by the students. It was Carlos Terrones, who I just met now, who persisted in trying to get me here. And really, it's not because I didn't want to come here. I realized that I thought that when I became a president, I was no longer Indian and a slave, and that at the conclusion of my term, I would have more time and freedom. It's not so, and I'm glad it's not so. Let me beg you to share with me. A few days ago, in an absolute insane attitude, 33 students were killed. And that insanity did not discriminate nationalities. Among the 33, there is one Peruvian student who precisely chose the path of studying international relations. Daniel Pérez Cueva. You know, if you would be kind enough to join me in the name of the 33 people and in the name of a countryman, if you allow me for a minute of silence, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much. I'm over here to share with you my thoughts on what has constituted now the central concern of the rest of my life. Working on the interrelationship between poverty-inequality, economic growth, and the future of democracy in the developing world, with particular emphasis in Latin America. But before I do that, it is an extraordinary occasion for me to pay tribute to an extraordinary man who has taught us in Latin America, has led us through his academic leadership with a fresh look to understand Latin America. A person who put his life in trying to learn a language, and through the language get into the hearts and the minds of Latin America. A man for whom I keep such a deep respect. I have met leaders in the world, but few those who combine the analytical capacity with a passion for understanding better people in Latin America, in particular the poor. My friend, Albert Frischlow, thank you from the bottom of my heart for what you've been doing for Latin America. I'd like to share with you some thoughts, and hopefully we'll have a chance to have some questions and answer period. At this very moment, as we meet this afternoon, 1.1 billion men and women in the world are trying to survive with less than $1 a day. 2.6 billion men and women are trying to survive in the world with less than $2 a day. When one tries to decompose by regions where the poverty are concentrated, you will find out that this is mainly centered in Africa, in some Southeast Asian countries, Philippines, and to a large extent in Latin America. In Latin America, a continent with 500 million people, 110 million men and women are trying now to survive with less than $1 a day. 230 million Latin Americans are trying to survive with less than $2 a day. But in addition to have those high levels of poverty, Latin America is one of the most unequal regions of the world, the most unequal region of the world. Measured in terms of income, measured in terms of accessibility of nutrition, health, and education, measured in terms of test scores. If you looked at the Gini coefficients or the variance of the log, whatever measure you want to take, you will find an enormous concentration, inequality. In Peru, we are 28 million people. In 2001, 54% of the population were below the poverty line. 24% of the population were under extreme poverty, defined by those who live with less than $1 a day. It's just some descriptive data about poverty and inequality. And the other side of the question, you looked at the last 5 years in the region. Economic growth has been very encouraging in the last 32 years. Within the last 32 years, the last 5 years, economic growth has grown on the average on the region 4.5% average. It fluctuated from country to country. In Peru, we grew up for 5 years, 6% consistently. And the last month of our administration, we grew up 9.2%. So the region as a whole, you have some economic growth. There has been previous periods longer than 5 years in which had been considerable economic growth, such as in Brazil during the 60s, 70s, Mexico, and even Peru. Yet, poverty and inequality have not reduced in any significant way. So, poverty, growth. The third piece of information has to do with democracy. In the last 22 years, the region has gone from a sentiment of euphoria about recuperating democracy from military dictatorships in different countries of the region. But the region is going from an enormous euphoria from that recuperation of democracy to an increasing unsatisfaction and losing of patience and faith in democracy. In those 22 years, 16 presidents that were democratically elected did not conclude their terms. There you have the three pieces of descriptive data. Let me try to attempt to get into the interrelationship of poverty, inequality, growth, and democracy. My friends, the leaders of the region, the leaders of the world, now are choosing different problems as a challenge. Environment, global security, clean water, transfer of technology, and yet you can choose whatever you want. I don't think they are mutually exclusive, but I think an old challenge has converted today in an urgent priority: poverty and inequality. If we are not able to confront effectively the poverty reduction, then the region will continue to have an increasing noise in the streets of Latin America, and the noise will be louder independently of what are your rates of economic growth. To be sure, economic growth is an indispensable component for any poverty reduction strategy. Inevitable. Because the name of the game is not to redistribute poverty. We need to grow. But economic growth, it's a means, but not an end. It's an indispensable component, but absolutely insufficient. It requires now more than ever the leadership of those who have the responsibility and privilege to conduct their community, the regions, their nations, to make decisions that parallel to the responsible management of the economy, construct a delivered social policy targeted to the poor, particularly to the extreme poor. I will share some data about Peru later on, and I'll do it with humility. But now I'm being clapped at Wall Street, at the IMF, at the World Bank. I'm a good boy. But that clap is easily overcome and silenced by the noises in Main Street in Latin America. Repeat, the noises of Main Street are much louder than the claps of Wall Street. That poses a question. The conventional wisdom has been saying that in order to reduce poverty, we need to achieve sustained rates of economic growth and increase income per capita. And that has been, the literature is abounded on that. And many Latin Americanists in the world has been sustaining that. The opposite proposition has been less examined, and that is having noises in the street that is reflected in turmoil, blocking the streets and the roads, cocaleros, teachers, miners, small agriculture who come out and scream. For some reason, it's the reflection of losing faith in democracy. But that noise could constitute a serious impediment to construct the adequate climate politically, economically, and legally to attract capital investment needed to achieve sustained rates of economic growth. My point is that poverty in itself, together with inequality, could constitute a real impediment for the needed achievement of sustained rates of economic growth. Secondly, if we are not able to reduce poverty in a significant way, poverty could conspire against democracy. Third, if we're not able to reduce poverty in a significant way, we might be contributing to even make it a more fertile land for the emergency of short-term populism that is empty, but is trying to capitalize on the high levels of poverty and inequality. But some people that have a thick wallet that do not come from having made their economy grow in a diverse sector, but rather have a thick wallet that comes from an exogenous factor that has to do with the increases in the price of oil in the international market. I want to be clear. The Hugo Chavez of Latin America are not really the origin of the instability of the new changes that has taken place. They are just trying to capitalize in a fertile land, high levels of poverty, high levels of inequality, discontent with democracy. The United Nations about 2 or 3 years ago came up with a study, and it reported that 54% of Latin Americans will rather an authoritarian government than to a democratically elected government, provided that they give them jobs. That's really very concerning piece of data. Why? Well, political democracy has very little sense if this is not accompanied by social and political democracy. Democracy and freedom is not just the act of going to vote on an election day. What freedom are we talking about? If tonight millions of people are going to sleep without knowing if tomorrow they have a job or they have something to eat. So the interrelationship between poverty, economic growth, and democracy. In the past, governments were overthrown by military coups. Now, there's a new fashion. You have a democratic face and an authoritarian heart. It is becoming a fashion to try to close the Congress, to create a new group, to elaborate a new constitution in which accumulates power. And desperation, people falls it. It's a mistake to try to focus the attention on the Hugo Chavez of the region. We need to assume our responsibility. We have been unable to reduce poverty in a significant way. And we're leaving sort of a free field for them to play. I don't get into any internal policies of the United States, but I wish the U.S. foreign policy were really taken seriously. The unfortunate rhetorics of the Hugo Chavez of Latin America, and really taken seriously the actions of the Hugo Chavez in Latin America. I'm completing a 3-week tour around the world, talking on the issue of this interrelationship. And a rather classical question, particularly in Asia. President, is Latin America really turning left? And you know what? I have too much respect for the left to believe that the Hugo Chavez had a left tendency. During the 50s, there was a left tendency that had content and that it played a critical role then. Aníbal Pinto, Fernando Enrique Cardoso, Raúl Prebisch, then. Maybe now it's a different story. What we cannot do is be passive observers of what other people are doing in the region. If we're not able to confront the challenge of reducing poverty in a significant way, then the needed economic, social, political instability will not be achieved, and consequently, growth rates will drop, and if there's not growth, there is no jobs. If there's no jobs, there is no income, both fiscal as well as personal income. If there is not income, then the poor get poorer. If the poor get poorer, then the noises in the street are much louder. And so we get into a vicious cycle. My friends, I know that poverty is not a very fashionable trend. But as I said, it's an urgent priority. If we really believe in democracy, we need to take the bull by its horns on policies that are directly targeted to the extreme poverty beyond the trickle-down theory. Latin America is a region who's losing patience, rightfully so. This is not just a theoretical proposition from a university professor, not even an experience, someone who transmits an experience after had the responsibility to conduct the destiny of my country. This is a thought that comes from someone who comes from extreme, extreme poverty. I know how it looks like. I'm one of 16 brothers and sisters. 6 twins. I'm not a twin. I'm very classical of extreme poverty data. 7 of my brothers and sisters died the first year of their life. You'll understand why I have decided to dedicate the rest of my days to the fight against poverty. As a president, we have delivered some results. But as we were talking previously with Professor Fishlow, everything in my life has been twice or 3 times as difficult than other normal people. I don't know how I got. I went from a small town in an Andean village, 12,000 feet above sea level, where I was born. Typical migration, rural urban of the 60s, the 70s, we migrated to the coast, to a port, Chimbote. And at the age of 5 years old, I became prematurely adult. I was a shoeshine boy in the street, sold newspaper and lottery simultaneously. I had a lot of other things to do at night in order to supplement the family income. For some reason, I went to the University of San Francisco in California, and then I did 2 masters at Stanford and a PhD, and then to the World Bank, this Harvard, the United Nations, Tokyo, OECD, the whole schmear. I'm the result of a statistical error. Because my society was not as open that it gave you an equal opportunity for education. But there's always a marginal error. That's what I am. Now I'm free. Thanks to education, I'm free. Now I can choose. Now I can decide whether I stay at Stanford or go to Harvard or go to Tokyo. I'm free. But I cannot go to sleep tranquil, knowing that 5 million Peruvians are living or striving to survive with less than $1 a day, or 230 million Latin Americans are trying to survive with $2 a day. I have chosen my path. And I say that with the bottom of my heart. I chose my path. In the days that it remains in my life, this is my cause. Poverty reduction in democracy. In democracy. And I know it's very tough. History will be in charge of judging the results of our administration. We are not good judges. I will let it. Maybe history will be more generous than the opposition parties, than Vladimiro Montesinos or Fujimori. But one thing I can say tonight with great pride and at the same time with humility. Whatever we did in Peru, before I became a president, in the streets before we had democracy, when I was a president, whatever we did it with absolute respect to democratic values. Respect for the freedom of the press, and tell me about them. Human rights, independence of power, and the pride to conduct an elections that would democratically, clean, transparent, and give the president to another president that the country chose. I know it's tough. It's registered here. It's tough. And that is why I tell my colleagues in Latin America, democracy demands that one is not only democratically elected, it's imperative that we govern democratically. It's not sufficient to be elected democratically. We need to govern democratically. And it's tough because you have to be submitted to the scrutiny of the press. In a country or in a continent with our very fragile democratic institutions, it's tough. I survived, I don't know how. My popularity dropped below 10% in a given moment. They want to vacate me out of the office. I was almost one. I was going to be the 16th president who did not finish the term. My popularity dropped below 10% because I stood stubbornly on what I believed to achieve sustained economic growth, but only as a mean. And it was tough. And I didn't change my policy because of the cover page. Each morning you wake up and see the front pages destroying me. They have told me everything. The only thing they have not told me is that they did not really have the courage to tell me that I was German. It's tough. We have produced some economic results. Economic growth, 6% a year average. International reserves, $15 billion reserves. This is what we have left for President Garcia. We have triple income from exports. Open up markets in China, and Thailand, and Singapore, Chile, just about to conclude. And we're just about to conclude a free trade agreement with the United States if President Garcia, who's coming on Monday to Washington, is able to persuade President Bush, but mainly the Congress, to conclude that. We left an economy with inflation of 1.5% average a year. I'm embarrassed. We left a fiscal deficit 0.2%. I don't know what the fiscal deficit in the United States is, but I'm not going to touch that one. Well, we open up markets. We inserted Peru in the global democratic community. And when we were just ready to harvest, we had to leave. We left after really going through a torture and that persistence of governing with the democratic values. At the end, I guess God was also indigenous. I end up with between 47 and 65% approval. But what a way. What a cruelty. My friends, I would like to go from the conceptual part of it to some micro reflections of what I think could be some of the ingredients of a much larger and more cohesive strategy for poverty reduction. Number one, let me share with you one specific experience. I think that growing It's indispensable, but it's insufficient. With the growth, we are ready now to finance direct condition subsidy to the extreme poor. Direct condition subsidy. Let me go very fast on this experience that's called Juntos, together. It's not a new program. I talked to President Lula. He bore me some of his experience. He provided, and then President Fox, and then Colombia, and we built up a program, a direct condition subsidy program directed to the extreme poor. Because the greatest challenge in that project was to identify who really are the true extremely poor who are in the borderline. And we began with a small district in Ayacucho, and up high in the mountains. We identified the district. Now there are 320 districts, but we began with a pilot. And the program consists in the following. We give $30 a month. And we give it to the woman. Poor women around the world have proved they're an incredible economist. I don't know what the Academy have not yet given a Nobel Prize to the poor woman in the world, but it's incredible what they do. They cook a pot of soup, and there are 5, 6, 10 people on the table. They just put a little more water, and it still tastes incredible. We give it $30 to the woman. They have to comply with certain requirements. Number one, the pregnant woman have to go inevitably with a card. They have to have a card. We give them a card. And they have to have 2 prenatal checkups and 2 postnatal checkups. Number 2, they are obliged to take the kids to be vaccinated. By the way, that saves money to the states on the long run. Number 3, they have to take the kids to school, and they have to register. That presupposes, so obviously, that the states need to provide hospitals and schools and medicine. Number 4, we give the women the $30. They have to comply with those requirements. If they don't, then we take them out of the program. And with the $30, we give them a whistle that they have to sleep with and their neck. As you know, poverty comes associated with high consumption of alcohol, particularly men. At least that's the case in Peru, and I know in many Latin American countries. So of course the men knows they're drinking, and they know that the woman has $30, and they're trying to grab them away to continue drinking. So if that happens, the woman, all it has to do is just blow the whistle, and all the women of the community comes out and beat the hell out of the men. The program is working. It's beautiful to see. It's beautiful to see. I received some people in the palace before I left, and the mother said, you know, Mr. President, since 2 weeks ago, my 12-year-old daughter is washing her teeth with toothpaste. That's for the extreme poor. So one suggestion to learn from the conceptual part of it to specific is, let's not be afraid to create programs that are directly targeted to the extreme poor. I had great difficulties, beginning with my own bureaucrats from the Minister of Finance, President, how are you going to do that? You're going to go subsidy? I mean, That's going to increase the fiscal deficit, and then we're going to have inflation. And then we're going to be in trouble with the IMF. Forget it. And then the IMF and the World Bank were skeptical. President, we didn't expect that from you. I mean, you've been at Stanford, you've been at Harvard, you've been at the World Bank. What is this direct conditional finance? I had to persuade them. I talked to them. It came a point where the vice president of the bank came and I said, listen, this is a presidential decision, that's it. Whether you want it or not. By then, of course, we have already proved that the fiscal deficit was low, that inflation was low, and that the economy was growing. Now they're fascinated with the project. Now they're evaluated once again, and the project is in 380 districts. One of the things that I can say for President Garcia, although he is not done because of his open willing, he continues with the project. That's one possible suggestion. Secondly, we cannot operate under the premises to fight poverty to give fish away. That's not very dignified and for the poor as a long-term policy. That's what some of the populists wants to do, trying to suggest that they can resolve the poverty issue by giving fish away because they have a lot of money, instead of giving them the right to learn how to fish. To identify small micro projects, productive micro projects that are associated with the community where they live in. And in that, trying to train them about how to manage the micro project. Kneading, producing better potato, corn, train them. Microcredits, and help them to identify the markets to place the products that they produce. And they generate their own income. They generate their own jobs. And three, inevitably, political leaders need to have the courage, and I say with the moral authority who haven't been in politics for a while. Political leaders need to have the courage to invest more and better in a good quality of nutrition, health, and education. Nutrition, health, and education. There is no substitute for fighting poverty than investing more and better in a good quality health and education. I know that's not very profitable for politicians in the short term, because the returns to investment in nutrition and health and education by definition is medium and long term. But we need leaders that make decisions thinking in the next generations and not just making decisions thinking in the next election. I'm sure there are other ingredients that we can add it to whatever poverty reduction strategy might be. But the empirical evidence in the world shows that no country has been able to come out from underdevelopment and redrawing the social face of the nation without investing in the human capital and the minds of the people. Let me conclude by saying that this is a task that one should not expect miracles overnight. However, we have witnessed a continent that is impatient, and it requires the courage from the leaders, from the political leaders, from the entrepreneurs. Last night, as I received this presidential award for my fight in democracy in Latin America, and I told the same businessmen who were there, my friends, you have to understand that it's very profitable for business to contribute, invest in poverty reduction. I look at it from the moral standpoint of view, from an ethical standpoint of view. but I invite you also to look at it from a business perspective. You know, 230 million Latin Americans who live with less than $2. It's almost 40% of the Latin American population. Look at us a market. What a wasted of a market. I mean, they can buy more if they have jobs. They will have income. If they have income, they can buy more milk, more bread. Whatever the businessmen produce, they can buy more Google, Yahoo, whatever. Secondly, if you contribute to poverty reduction, you reduce instability. There will be less turmoil, and therefore the risk, the country risk, will decrease, and when the country risk is lower, the interest rate are lower, and consequently, your cost of production is reducing, and you are much more competitive with all the countries in the world. If businessmen, if entrepreneurs engage themselves in the social responsibility of entrepreneurs, then with a medium and long term, they will make more money. The production of productivity of the workers will increase. Workers will be more satisfied. It's not only the responsibility of politicians, it's also the responsibility of entrepreneurs, and also it's the responsibility of civil society. Civil societies cannot only be NGOs. They need to be active participants in policies that are oriented to poverty reduction. You know, in my view, this challenge of poverty reduction associated with democracy is too big just to leave it in the hands of politicians. Let me confess that if I ever will make the mistake to be a president again, I tell you my agenda will be completely different. Not because I'll change perspective. It's because when I was elected, entrepreneurs and people in Peru were very skeptical of my government. How in the hell is going to be the government of Cholo Toledo? And they wasted almost 2 years. I understand. I don't agree. The first indigenous descent that was democratically elected in 500 years, and also came with a label of being a guy in the street with a headband, violent. So they were skeptical. They didn't want to put the money. I said, now my agenda, my priority will be different because I already have proved that we can deliver some macroeconomic results, and therefore I will put more emphasis and time and energy and resources and invest in more in health and education and specific programs directed to the poor. My friends, part of recuperating the faith on democracy has to do with accountability. One of the greatest, most damaging illness in the developing world is corruption, which increases the cost of production, robs the faith of people. Leaders need to be accountable for their decisions. It is incredible how some leadership recycles themselves without responding, without being accountable. With all due respect to some who might be offended. We need to be accountable for our actions. My friends, today I conclude 3 weeks of intensive participation in 3 continents, talking about the issue of poverty and democracy. And what a privilege to conclude in an institution that I have an enormous respect, an academic institution. Education is nothing, something that you can substitute it for. I am the walking evidence of what education can do, even if it is a result of a statistical error. Once again, let me pay tribute to the organizers of this conference, in particular for giving me the privilege to re-encounter one of the persons that I have a deep respect, President Albert Fishlove, and to the students. Thank you very much for having done that. One last reflection. I know that there are foreign students who have the privilege to come to universities such as Columbia University to have a good quality of education. You have in your hands and your mind and your shoulders the responsibility of the leadership of your respective countries. Please, once you conclude your studies, go back to your country. Your country needs you. Those who are Latin American needs you. Don't leave in the hands of other people to construct the future life of our kids, our children, or the children of our children. We cannot be passive receptors of what other people do for us. Those who are from Latin descent and who are in the United States and who are not going to go back, I urge you to prepare yourself to assume an enormous responsibility perhaps in the next 15 to 20 years in this country. Those who are Latin descent are going to have an enormous responsibility perhaps in the next 2 decades. And therefore, we need to prepare the leadership needed for a country which is undergoing dramatic changes, I hope. I have to preach with example. I don't intend to stay the rest of my life in the United States. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it.
President Toledo has graciously agreed to receive questions. There is a microphone which is here in the center, which is available to you, and I would ask that you keep your questions brief.
Gracias. Aló, aló. ¿Está bien? Doctor Toledo, su inglés es tan fluido que yo no puedo hacer la pregunta en inglés. Si usted me puede ayudar a traducirla para todos. La primera vez que oímos esa referencia de $1 para miles de personas para supervivencia fue en el año 2000 y la hizo por primera vez, que al menos yo la vi, fue James Wolfenson, presidente del Banco Mundial, pero también dijo ese mismo día en ese discurso que el 90% de la economía mundial está en manos del 20%. Eso dice todo. La pregunta para usted, señor Toledo, sabiendo la privilegiada posición que tiene usted por su sensibilidad, por su posición de expresidente, ¿hasta dónde puede llegar cuando nosotros que salimos de recintos universitarios en las calles de Lima, de Bogotá, de Santiago, no entendemos? Porque el señor García Alan García hace unos meses era casi un prófugo buscado de la justicia, como el señor Fujimori, y hoy es presidente. El señor Álvaro Uribe Vélez en Colombia es narcotraficante, es paramilitar y es el mejor aliado estratégico de América Latina. Merecen respeto para nosotros, las gentes humildes, los políticos, que dicen cosas, pero que, como usted dice, la democracia no trae ventajas. ¿Hasta dónde usted nos puede ayudar?
Primero, yo no soy productor de cifras. Compartimos las cifras, lo produce el Banco Mundial, las Naciones Unidas, investigaciones. Son datos más descriptivos, entonces no traigo nada nuevo, pero simplemente llamo la atención a algo que es absolutamente intolerable en el mundo. Esos niveles de pobreza y de concentración de la riqueza. Segundo, I'm not gonna comment about other leaders in Latin America have their own internal policies. It wouldn't be pertinent for me to get into the internal affairs of any individual country and the region, because I want to be consistent with what I have said when I was a president. I didn't want President Hugo Chavez to interfere in the internal politics of Peru. However, as a citizen of the Latin America, I am, like you, very much deeply concerned with those levels of poverty and inequality. But we need to go beyond that. Now that we have the diagnosis and we might share that diagnosis, what do? I have just suggested 3 possible ingredients of any poverty reduction strategy. But more importantly, none of them will be as important as people like you, or people like you people, return to your own country to take leadership in their community, in your region, and your country. It is important that we do not just fall into be a passive commentator or receptor of what other people do. We need to assume the challenge not only because of us, but rather for the life or the quality of the life of our children and the children of our children. Another question.
Hi. I know you said you didn't want to comment on other countries, but I'll ask. Feel free not to answer. But as most of us probably know already, another indigenous president has been elected in Latin America. I was wondering if you could tell us what you think Evo Morales has to learn from Alejandro Toledo, and what Alejandro Toledo has to learn from Evo Morales.
I am absolutely sure they have a lot of things to learn from Evo Morales. I wouldn't even take the risk of trying to provide any advice to the President Evo Morales. As a Latin American citizen, I do push and fight for regional integration, not only of the Andean community, but also the Latin American community. But in that process of searching for integration, we need to do it with one agenda, the regional agenda, not the individual ideological or populist objective that sometimes interferes with the objective of integration. Now, we have started some concrete projects of integration between Peru, Brazil, and Bolivia with this huge highway that integrates 3 countries in Latin America. I'm sure there are other areas of integration. For example, we no longer need a visa or a passport to go from one country to another in South America. You don't need it. If we can consolidate the courses of universities in each country through agreements, that will be better. If we can learn from some social experience that each country had, then we save time. You know, in the past, Latin American looked at Europe and the United States as these sources of progress and inspiration. And we made a mistake of not turning our look around just to the side, to look at ourselves, to learn from each other, perhaps to put together our comparative advantage, turn it into competitive advantage, and go out to penetrate markets together. I'm sure that we have a lot of complementarities. But when that effort is tinted with some interest in populism, capitalizing on the fact that they have money and that they have poverty, that doesn't help very much for the integration purpose. You know, I have Bolivia is a country that we respect tremendously. We have the same roots. We have the same languages. We have the same tradition. It's difficult to distinguish from one another until the Spanish came. But so whatever happens in Bolivia, does affect Peru and vice versa, and other countries in the region. So I wish God will inspire President Morales and the presidents of Latin America to take the route of going beyond the day-to-day politics, although I know that it's very costly, and I say that by experience.
There's no woman who wishes to ask a question?
Good evening. Mr. Toledo, I was wondering, as a Peruvian student myself, what can we do today that would affect poverty in Peru? Because you have, as you have said, in 20 years or so, yes, maybe I will go back, but in day-to-day, you know, what can we do now to help the people of Peru in the poverty crisis that is going on now and has been going on for about 10 years?
If the leaders of the world today center their attention in state policies more than just short-term government policy, maybe we can construct a region that grows stably with poverty reduction and democracy, and that perhaps could create a picture in which you will need not to wait 20 years to go back. To a large extent, it's understandable. Now, I was at Harvard about 4 weeks ago, and the student said, yeah, I want to go back to Peru, but I'm going to go to New York first. I'm going to work in Merrill Lynch for 3 or 4 years, and then I'll go back. I understand. The best thing that I can think out loud is trying to take advantage of the most that you can while you're a student and prepare yourself to assume a leadership role in whatever area you choose. Because there is no substitute. There is not gold mine. There is not oil. There is not silver. There is not gas. For more rich that it could be, that can substitute the richness of knowledge, the richness of having a good education that enables you to be free and help all the people who don't have the chance and the opportunity to have the kind of education that you are having in order to be free. People are only free when they have the capacity to choose. And so my only reflection is try to take advantage of the best you can, and do consider seriously to go back to Peru and assume a leadership in the area that you choose.
Hello, Presidente Toledo. Thank you very much for your visit to Colombia. I am also Peruvian, and I would like to ask two quick questions that are very related to each other. The first one, as you know, in the year 2002 and 2003, when the Peruvian government was negotiating the construction of the Camisea gas pipeline and the Camisea exploitation, there were 50 colleges in the United States who were criticizing the Peruvian government because the impact that could have the Camisea gas pipeline in indigenous populations. I am not talking about Peruvians who live in Lima or Arequipa, but Peruvians who really hardly speak Spanish. And I would like to know which is your opinion, because I know, at the time I was not in Peru also, but I know that you are very concerned about the situation of the indigenous people in Peru. And that the other question that is related is, you know that also the US Congress is actually considering if they will approve or not the free trade agreement with Peru. And one of their concerns is the situation of the labor standards in Peru. So what do you have to say to this criticism from the US congressman? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, you're preaching to acquire on the issue of environment. We got a prize from the World Fund, this international organization that dedicates to environment in the world. Camisea project was one of the projects that was a test, whether we were able to take advantage of natural resources with two fundamental conditions. One, environment, and two, respecting the cultural idiosyncrasy of the communities where the pipelines go. And three, that the benefits coming from the Camisea project returns to the region. Let me tell you, Cusco, Las Malvinas, where Camisea begins, is the first beneficiary, the region, and with the conditions that it goes to the municipalities also, and to the indigenous community. So environment, respect for the culture, idiosyncrasy, and share the benefits of the project. I told the miners, you don't have to worry with me, because I'm going to respect whatever the rules of the game has been in the contract in which you came or are coming now. But number one, you have to respect the environment standards. Number two, the job security for the workers, job security of the workers. And three, try to provide some aggregate value to your production. That is how, during our administration, 10% of the gold production need to stay, so that people who work, crafts, who do work with gold, not only to export, stay in. With respect to the second part of you, my friend, I don't think that free trade agreements is an ideology. And neither is free trade agreement is the policy that resolves the poverty issue. It's one component, as long as it generates jobs, particularly in sectors that are labor intensive, such as the agro-industry, textile. We have developed 6 agro-industry poles. In the south, Tacna. In the south, in Arequipa, Majisiwa. In the south, Ica. Ica, there's lack of employment now, of unemployment. There is no sufficient, and it generates jobs and provides some aggregate value. Then you continue on, you go to Chavimochic in the north, almost Chirapura. Why it's important? Because there are jobs generated. Not only for the big business in agro-industry. If you construct a productive chain, they pull the medium and the small agriculture producers. I will never sign a free trade agreement that goes against national production or goes against Peruvian jobs. I want to be clear on that. But there are some pieces of data. The United States market, it's 181 times bigger than the Peruvian market. And I'm proud to see at the restaurants in New York last night that they are serving Peruvian asparagus, that they generate jobs for the poor. So, cost-benefit analysis. If the benefits are greater than the cost, I'll sign the free trade agreement. So, one need not to be so rigid and fundamentalist either way to assume that the free trade agreement are the solution to the poverty issues in Latin America. But it contributes. And I hope, and I hope that President Garcia, who was reluctant and naked to go into a free trade agreement during campaign, now he has changed his mind, and he's coming on Monday to try to negotiate a free trade agreement. If he does it right, it's fine. Now, the labor standards. I said I will never do anything that jeopardize the jobs of the Peruvians. As you probably know, Peru is a member of the ILO, the International Labor Organization. And the Office for Latin America is based in Lima. And we are members and we have to comply with that. Moreover, I want you to know that I work at the ILO. When I was intelligent before I got into politics, when I was in academia, I worked for the ILO. We wrote a book together. So you know where my heart is. Now, it is true that now in the United States, it's got into a process of elections. And I'm not going to get into US politics, but I think we lost 3 or 4 months critical. There were August, September, October of last year, which would have concluded. But listen, let's not cry it over the spilled milk. Let's try to see what we can do together to approve those free trade agreements, provided that they generate jobs. One last comment. With all due respect, it has come the time where industrialized countries who preach free trade agreement will practice what they preach. We need to build a free trade freeway that goes both ways. The United States and Europe and Japan is telling us that you cannot subsidize, particularly your agriculture sector. And the United States and Europe and Japan, they subsidize the products. Don't tell us to play ball in a free market when really you are not practicing what you're preaching. I just want to drop in that comment.
Okay. Mr. President, I just want to ask you, you said that Peru under your administration was growing 6% in average per year, but your popularity went under 10%. At the same time, Brazil was growing less than 3%, and Lula got reelected in spite of all corruption scandals in Brazil. Why, did you become unpopular in Peru if the country was growing and you were fighting the inequality in a way like Bolsa Família in Brazil with the Juntos project that you mentioned here in Peru? So, and Lula, some people that said that he was popular because of the Bolsa Família. But anyway, Brazil was growing less than 3%, Peru was growing 6%. Lula got reelected despite the corruption. You were very highly unpopular. I just want to understand better that, please.
Let me share with you 2 pieces of data. Number one, I'm sure Professor Fishlove has shared with you people that the relationship between growth and jobs and social program has a lag effect. It is not automatically when you come from a crisis that you increase your growth or the economy automatically turns into. Number two, it's a medium and long-term project, the social programs. And it takes the courage to pay the political price. I did. I think President Lula is doing a great job, by the way. I don't know what you think about it, but I know what he's doing. From my perspective, I'm not a Brazilian. Number 3, yes, indeed, my popularity dropped below 10%. But I thought I have said something. At the end of my administration, for the first time in the history of Peru, a president left with a popularity between 47 to 65% approval. Of course, that had a high political price. That it's over here, I know it. And it has been tough. But just at the end, they want to vacate me. But I persisted. I'm known to be very stubborn. I persisted, and it's a medium and long term. Poverty will not be eliminated in 5 years, let's be realistic. But as long as the tendency continues and it goes in the right direction with a high velocity, we're fine. I don't expect President Garcia to eliminate poverty by 2011. I don't expect President Lula to eliminate poverty in Brazil by the time he concludes his period. But as long as we make progress in that direction, it's fine. So I'm not embarrassed about my low popularity. Please do judge me in my whole context. And I'm sure that history is going to be more generous than the press has been with me.
Last question? Okay, here, over here. No, one more.
Yeah.
Yeah, one more question.
Here.
Mr. President, are you considering running for presidency again?
Oh my God. I was afraid that was coming. Now, listen. I already had the privilege to conduct the destiny of my country, coming from where I come from, you know. I already had that. Now I have this task. I have created this Center for Development and Democracy that deals with poverty, inequality, growth, and democracy. That's what I'm telling you now. Listen, it's only 8 months since I left the presidency. Please give me a break. Thank you very much. Listen, let me once again congratulate the organizers, Mr. Terrones. Let me thank this school in particular and the Latin American Center for allowing me this exchange of opinions that enables me to learn what you have in your mind. And finally, for having concluded, now I can sleep, concluded these 3 intensive weeks around the world, and with a great pleasure to be in Columbia University, and particularly seeing my great friend, Albert Fischler. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
You're not finished yet. You're not finished yet.
I'm not?
No, Patricio and Carlos are coming up here, and we have a little gift
my
to
God.
present to you.
Please.
Good evening. On behalf of the Columbia University community, my name is Pat Contreras. I'm the MPA president, and I stand here with Carlos Terrones, the organizer of this event, the Institute of Latin American Studies. Thank you. And in particular, on behalf of the students of the School of International and Public Affairs, we thank you for your time and sharing your thoughts with us and your inspiration. Muchísimas gracias, and we hope you return. Thank you so much.